Hey everyone, so I know it's been a while since I've made a video. My plan is to hopefully start adding more content to this channel. I really enjoy doing this. There's just been a lot of other obligations that have kind of taken my time, so I haven't been able to add as much content as I want to, but hopefully I can start adding more tutorials in Maya and Blender to this channel. So to start, the first new video we're gonna be doing is inside of Blender, and I'm gonna be walking through the process of creating a run cycle. We're gonna be using and leveraging a lot of sort of Blender's tools, as well as just letting Blender kind of animate those in-betweens for us that will allow us to quickly block in a run cycle and then start to refine and build the poses that we want on top of that. If you watched my really quick walk cycle tutorial inside of Blender, we're going to be using a very similar approach where we just start with a mirrored contact pose, let Blender kind of fill in those in-betweens, and then start refining those individual poses themselves. Now this will be a little bit longer because this is going to be, completely real time. I'm going to try to go through the process as far as I can and get the run cycle to a pretty decent place. And I am going to be using the iAnimate Lisa rig. It is a rig that requires you to be in any of the iAnimate workshops in order to actually gain access to. So if you aren't in an iAnimate workshop, you can find a lot of really nice free rigs at the Blender Studio website, as well as the Agora community. They have a really large selection of really nice Blender rigs that you can use. So really any of those will work. For this example, I'm just going to be using the Lisa rig. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into Blender and start creating this run cycle. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with this already made contact pose for our run cycle. So this is sort of the first pose of our run cycle, similar to what you would see in the walk cycle. And really quickly, I'm just going to pull over this reference here. So this is just a quick kind of reference I've made of sort of the main poses of a run cycle. And one of the really important aspects of a run cycle is that typically within somewhere in your run cycle, your character is going to have both feet completely off the ground. So we have our contact here at the beginning, which we already have created here. And then we have our down, our passing, our up, which is really the sort of push off pose. You can see the character's leg is fully kind of extended and really pushing forward. And then we have this, what I call up two, which is the actual hang time or in air pose. And then we have back to our contact. So right now this is a 10 frame cycle for this run cycle. Obviously we can experiment with timing and play around with, maybe we can have a much faster run cycle or a much slower run cycle that feels almost more like a slow sort of jog if you wanted to add some time in here. It's also important to note that you can really play around with the up two pose or this hang time pose to get a sort of different feeling in your run cycle. You can really stretch this out and maybe have the character like completely off the ground for like 4 frames and then kind of quickly stomp down to get sort of a different feeling to your run cycle. But usually around 2 frames, I feel like is a good feeling for your run cycle to kind of have your character sort of both feet off the ground for around 2 frames or so is usually sort of like the good sort of default run to start with, and then you can always experiment and play around with it further. But let's go ahead and just get started here. And we have our contact pose. So I'm going to press A to select all of my control curves. And what I want to do is just take this contact pose and mirror it for the opposite leg to, again, start utilizing Blender's tools to quickly make a basic run cycle. So I'm going to go to frame 0 here. I like to start my animations always on frame 0. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that keyframe. I'm going to go up here to pose, copy pose. You can see obviously the keyboard shortcut there displayed, which is Control C. And then what I want to do is go down to frame 10 and I'm going to choose paste pose flipped. Keyboard shortcut for that is Shift Control V. So now you can see we have our flipped contact pose. And there you can see it playing through here. Again, Blender is just blending between these 2 contact poses. Obviously, it's not looking like a run cycle just yet, but this is actually a lot of really helpful information that we can use. And utilizing this mirror tool obviously will allow us to create this run cycle much faster, but also I like using Blender's in-betweens that it gives us that it gives here to really start kind of fleshing out this run cycle here. And I really like to utilize what Blender gives us as far as these in-betweens to use this to build our animation on. So we know that we're getting a nice clean transition from this pose to this pose. And what I can do real quick is I'll just copy the pose on frame 0, paste it on frame 20. So now we kind of have our cycle here. All right, that's working all right. Obviously, it's not really looking like much at the moment. So what I want to do now is focus on building out really this first step. And we can focus on building this first step, get that looking pretty decent, and then we can go ahead and use the same mirror tool to create the opposite step for us. So what I like to do on this is I like to really layer on this information. So I'm going to start with just the up and down of the hips, which on this character, I believe is the Z location. All right, and I'll zoom in here. And what I'm going to do is jump to frame 2. What I can go ahead and do is press A to select everything, press I to lock a keyframe down. And if you try to do that in your viewport by pressing I and you get this menu that pops up, just make sure you have your active keying set to whatever you want. You could do, location and rotation. On a rig like this, I always just use, selected bones, whole character, because I like to lock a keyframe down on everything as I'm working. So I locked a keyframe down on frame 2. I'm going to go back and select this torso control, zoom in here. I'm going to start creating this kind of down position as the hips drop. I'm not really worried at all about what the legs are doing at this moment. I'm just going to focus on getting the up and down of the hips working well. So there is the down position. It might be a little bit too low, but what I want to do is jump to frame 4, press A to select everything, I to lock a keyframe down, and all the controls. I'm going to go forward and start bringing the hips up. So once it hits the down position, the hips are going to start traveling up and kind of continue traveling up all through the rest of this until it gets back to that next contact position. So the hips are probably going to be up here. If I look at this graph, we know the up position, that hip is going to be still kind of pushing off. So it goes into the down, the hips drop, they start to rise up and hit the highest point on that sort of up hang time pose. So I can play around with this. Press A to select everything, jump to frame 8. Press I to lock a keyframe down. And this, I want to make sure I do higher than that contact. So it's going to hit this up pose, hang time pose, and then drop back down to that contact. So we're getting something that feels a bit like that. And that down might be a bit too much. Might do something more like this. And the amount of up and down, we can always tweak that. I kind of just want to start to establish the basic up and down sort of path of the hips through here. And then once we actually mirror this over for the next step, we can actually further refine, the tangents and how these are flowing together. But again, right here, I'm kind of just focusing on getting this first step kind of working. So what I want to do now is start fleshing out the legs a bit more. So here, I'm going to open up the side menu and go to the Translate Z, kind of zero all of these out. So I know the foot is going to be flat on the ground, and I might go ahead and add a bit of rotate Z on this so the feet aren't, completely straight on. We still want to have a bit of angle to them. But I want to make sure the feet are actually, flat on the ground for a lot of this transition through here. So again, go to the Translate Z to make sure it's flat. Grab the foot roll control, zero that out. And I want to take this value on rotate Z, Control C to copy it, and then paste that there on frame 4. And you can see that really all we're doing is still utilizing the blending that Blender is giving us and kind of just making sure the feet are flat on the ground, but they're still traveling in a way that actually works really well for this run cycle, kind of getting all that information in there for free, which is nice. All right, so I'm gonna go to frame 6, and this is where I still want this foot on the ground, I believe. Zero out this foot roll for now, but I do want to make sure I get this foot in that really extended kind of push off pose, because this is the pose right before she actually, you know, leaps off the ground. So I want to make sure I get a nice kind of extension. I can look at this graph again and kind of see, I want to make something similar to this that we see there. And then here, obviously, I want to push that foot back. So I can press G to go into the translate and then double click X, or excuse me, click Y. Looks like it's in the Y axis. So I'll click that and just translate this foot back so I get a nice extension. Make sure that foot feels like it's pushing off, kind of following through there into that contact position. So on frame 8, I might even push this back a little bit more as it swings back and then starts to fly forward into that next contact. All right, so now what I want to do is take a look at the translate Y through here. And it looks like it's interesting. Looks like we've got like linear tangents on a lot of these. So I want to make sure what I do is, let me try to select everything. Make sure I'm just using a Bezier tangent on that. Make sure I fix some of these. Some of these tangent handles looked a little bit weird. Just making sure I change them to, you know, auto clamped. Something like that works. And I think that's just because this is a file I had worked in previously, so I probably tweaked some tangent handles, so it's kind of kept that information. But what I want to do is all the way up to this push off, I want to make sure that this is just a flat, linear, straight line from here, from this contact, all the way to this push off here. So I'm going to select this key here and press V, and let's see, I'll go to free, and then I'll select this tangent handle, and I'll change it to linear. So we should get a nice straight linear transition on this foot moving back. Something like that. All right. And then on this foot, I'll just quickly tweak the path through some of this. So I think here, I probably want to bring the foot down maybe a little bit. Here, I want to go ahead and zero out this foot roll. I don't want any foot roll on these poses here. I'll probably take this and rotate it back and just have a bit more drag on that foot. Looks like I'll need to tweak this knee control here. Maybe start moving that foot back here as well. So the foot might be kind of moving out this direction as it flows through and then kind of swings back forward. I think as it swings forward here, it's gone a little bit too far inward, so I'm going to ease out on that. Foot roll, I'm going to zero out here because I don't need any foot roll on that pose. I can just rotate that foot. Again, this is the sort of hang time pose there. All right, and I think we're getting something that feels decent for this first step. Still not perfect. What I want to do now is go in here to, should be the rotate X on this control here. I want to fix some of these tangent handles. All right. So this, I believe I want to start rotating the chest down through a lot of this. I just want to start adding a bit of kind of back and forth rotation on the chest here. This should be a pretty simple curve for this. So it goes down, continues traveling down, so the chest is rotating down along the x-axis all the way up to frame 4. And then starts to rotate back into where it's at in the contact position. So it should be pretty subtle, and I think I could probably increase some of this. And let me jump into the translate Y. Excuse me, translate Z. It's up and down for this. All right. And I feel like this down might be a bit too harsh. I might need to just ease out of it a bit more. Something like that. All right, so now what I want to do is do a bit of work on the chest control and add just a bit of rotation on that as well. All right, so I'm going to grab the chest control here and I'll jump to the rotation X, my graph editor, and I'm going to just jump forward here and go to frame 6 and I'll start bringing this up. And I'm just like rotating the chest downward. And these keyframes here on 2 and 4, I'm just gonna probably bring this one up and create a curve a bit like that. And then on frame 8, I'll grab this keyframe and kind of just bring it up. Something about like that. So basically what's going to happen is this chest is rotating down as she lands. Even on this push off, we're getting even more rotation this way, and we can increase it if we need to later. But I'm kind of just starting with just some basic movement. I might actually go ahead and grab all these keyframes and just start shifting them up a bit to increase that rotation just a little bit. That might be too much, but we can, I think that's working okay. Now what I want to do is grab my torso control and go to the rotate X here, and I might tweak what this curve is actually doing here. So I think I'm going to go to the keyframe on frame 2, and I'm actually going to rotate this back a bit. So we're kind of getting a bit of counter animation between what this torso control is doing and what the chest control is doing, but that is giving us a nice feeling of kind of breakup in the spine there. You can see as she lands, this kind of lurch forward, but I'll probably dial off this movement that goes up to frame 4. So I'll probably grab this keyframe, bring it down a bit. And I might bring this up like that and see how this looks. Something like that. So we get this backward movement. Then she starts to kind of lean forward as she pushes off. And then coming back to the contact, her chest is actually rotating, her torso is rotating back as she, pushes her left leg forward, and it's going to continue rotating back through here. So we get something that feels a bit like that. And already we can start to see this kind of run cycle begin to kind of take shape. One thing I do know that I want to do for this run cycle is, since we mirrored this pose directly to frame 10, it's just a mirrored image. But for this run cycle, I want something that feels a little less kind of basic, with the arms kind of just going and mirroring their animation, just going back and forth. I actually probably want to have this arm holding the gun kind of hanging out behind her as she's running. So she's still, like, during the entire run cycle, she's kind of holding the arm behind her that's holding the gun. And then this left arm will probably have kind of similar movement to what it's doing, but probably dial that back quite a bit to where it's not going, all the way back behind her, which means we'll probably dial back the amount of rotation that we're getting on the chest. But I do still like to have just a starting point like this, kind of this straight mirrored animation, or the straight mirrored pose, and then actually start kind of refining it further once I'm kind of happy with the basic kind of results that we're getting here. And on this hip control, I want to try something where I know as she lands and puts her weight, the hip should shift this way as her hips kind of take that weight on her right leg. So the hips are going to move that direction and then start to even out a bit. And then on this push off, get a bit of kind of stretch there, or rotation inward toward that leg that's pushing off. And then kind of tweak the amount that it's rotating here until we get something like that. So I might jump into my graph on the rotate Z and kind of look at this curve and make sure it's kind of doing what I want. I'm gonna change that to auto clamped. This should actually be in the rotate Y, I believe. Yeah. So I'll grab this. I might increase that just a bit. So I'll bring that keyframe up. This I might dial back how quickly it snaps over. So I might just grab this keyframe and bring it up a little bit to kind of ease into that transition to where we have this sort of, push off with the hips kind of rotating down this direction. And then it's going to start moving to the position on frame 10 there. And one thing to keep in mind is that this might just be too much movement for this. Let me see if I can maybe bring this keyframe up and do something a bit like that. So we kind of have just this upward rotation on this curve, and then it starts to travel down all the way through this. Try something like that. And that's looking okay. And it might just be something where I think at this point of a run cycle where I've kind of really just focused on this one step through this whole section. I want to start adding in the other step. Real quickly though, I'm going to take a look at my translate X on this and take a look at what this is doing. All right. I think something like that should work. One thing I do need to make sure I do, which is always important to check, on the foot that is planted, you want to make sure you don't have any, side to side sliding as the foot is actually moving back. And you can see I have a lot of that. Like as soon as she plants her foot should not be sliding back and forth like this. But you can see I have it like sliding inward all the way into the push off position. So I think this pose on frame 6, let me take a look at this curve. Yeah, you can see this curve is not doing at all what it should be. So I'm going to grab this keyframe and have this foot positioned a bit more like that because I don't want it to be quite as far inward there. And then here, let's see, I want to take the value on frame 6 of the translate X, and I'm going to see what happens if I just paste it on frame 2 here. Paste it on this frame as well. So now we have the foot kind of moving in, and then it stays, completely flat until we get a transition kind of like that there. I think that should work for now. Cool. All right, so what I'm going to do now is go ahead and do the kind of mirror tool to basically take all this animation that we created here and flip it over so we have the opposite step. So we have a full cycle here, and then we can go in and kind of further see how our animation is looking and just continue to refine it. So I'm going to take the keyframe on frame 2. I'm going to go up here to copy pose. Then I'm going to go to frame 12. Again, pressing A in the viewport to make sure I select all my controls and going up here to pose, paste pose flipped. And now you can see we've basically just got the opposite step. Now you can use the shortcuts for this. I have found, I don't know if it's just a bug, it's just something I've noticed that sometimes if I use the keyboard shortcuts to do this paste pose flipped, it doesn't flip it properly. And it could just be, it's most likely just user error, but it's just something that I've gotten to the habit of. I've experienced that a couple times to where I just go to this drop down and do it there. It's just something I've gotten in the habit of. So I'll just copy the pose on frame 4, go to 14, paste pose flipped. So now we've got this opposite pose here. Select the keyframe on frame 6, pose, copy pose, go to 16, paste pose flipped. All right, then finally go to frame 8, copy that pose. All right, so now we've got a nice full cycle here. And once we got that extra step in there, we can really see kind of how this is looking with a full cycle. So that's the animation we have so far. And already you can see it's starting to take shape with this animation. We've really kept it simple and just kind of figured out the main poses for this run cycle and started to kind of just layer on that detail for this. Something I do notice is it feels like I'll need to tweak this here. I might actually just go ahead and go to frame 2, copy the translate X, go to frame 0, and just paste that there. So it kind of stays flat for that whole cycle. I might bring it that direction just a bit and then maybe copy this value, paste it here. Even that little bit of sliding at the beginning, I feel like looks a little bit strange. And then we'll just need to copy this from frame 0 to frame 20. And then here, this transition from here to here feels like a little bit too much, so I'll probably bring this keyframe up. All right. And then this, I need to do the same thing. We're getting quite a bit of sliding here that I don't want. I might push this keyframe back to right around here, and then take this value and copy it on frame 12. Gonna make sure that foot is staying completely, planted as it goes through this. Here I might grab all these keyframes and push it in just a bit. All right, that's looking decent there. Something I do feel like I want to do now that I see the full kind of cycle in motion is I want to kind of increase this movement here. So I'm going to take both of these keyframes, probably push them back just a little bit. Take all these keyframes. Push them up so that it's kind of rotating further downward. So we're just getting a bit more exaggeration on that back and forth motion on the rotate X. And I'm going to do the same for the chest to kind of increase this feeling. So I'll probably just grab all these keyframes here and just start to bring them up. Something like that. All right, let me take a look at the torso control to translate X. Let's see. Just overall, from the front view, the legs are not quite feeling the way that I would want. Let me try something. I'm going to grab this keyframe, bring it down, grab all these and kind of bring it down a bit more. Something like this. And then here, I'll probably bring this up. Because I feel like she's not hanging out on the supporting leg long enough to where her weight should still be kind of hanging out over on this side longer. And it just felt a little too even as far as like the back and forth on the hips. She was moving, shifting her weight back and forth before it really felt correct. So like here, as she lands, the weight should still be kind of transferring that direction until she starts doing this push off to where we see it kind of start to go the opposite direction for that next contact position. So move that direction, land, continue moving that direction. And when she lands, she'll get a stronger kind of shift over this direction here. Continue that way. And then as she starts to push off, then it can start going back the opposite direction into the next kind of contact position. So we have something that feels a bit more like this. I think that definitely feels better there. All right, next up what I want to do is go ahead and actually cycle this so I can see how the animation is flowing from the end of the cycle back to the beginning to make sure, all my curves are flowing nicely. If we don't do that, then we can get strange like hitches. Like I know this flow from here to the end of the animation is going to look a little bit weird. If I go ahead and let me go ahead and just select this and press A to select everything, and I'll do Shift E to open up the set keyframe, and then I'll do make cyclic to cycle this. You can see it's going to produce this weird kind of result where we have the hips moving over, and then they're going to kind of almost flatten out into the last keyframe, and then we get this slow out where we would probably want something that feels a bit more and looks a bit more like this. Oops. Kind of a nice flow between these keyframes as much as you can to get something that feels a bit better. Something like that. Now what I want to do is press A, select all my controls. I'm going to select all the keyframes there in the graph editor. Press Shift E to make cyclic. That should cycle all of my control curves that I have selected. It looks like it worked. I'll just jump through some of these and make sure it looks like it properly kind of cycled everything. Cool. So I still feel like we're getting a bit of just like shaking. This weird kind of just shaking. I think I'm feeling that with like her knee movement. Feels a little bit too poppy. Some of that stuff we can really just start to iron out as we go further. Obviously this chest movement is not working, but I'm not quite worried about this kind of rotation this direction, because again, this is going to be something I want to tweak, because I kind of want her to, in this run cycle, to kind of hang out in this pose as far as her upper body. So her arm should kind of stay behind her throughout the cycle. This arm should stay more or less kind of in front of her, and her upper body should kind of keep roughly this pose through the whole cycle. Whereas right now it's just kind of looping, mirroring back and forth the arms and the chest, which doesn't look that interesting or that great. But we've got a solid foundation we can start to work with really quickly on this cycle. We just really, again, started with the basic poses and just let Blender kind of figure out the sort of in-betweens in there. And then we started to just refine our poses, making sure our feet were moving the way they should and layering on some torso and chest movement. So what I want to do now is go in here and do a quick pass on just getting the upper body kind of working more kind of how I want. All right, so I'll probably start with dialing back the amount of rotation on the chest, the amount of this sort of like back and forth movement, which I believe is on the Z axis. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up in the graph editor. And I kind of just want to start going through this and figuring out how far I actually want it to go this direction. So since we just mirrored the contact pose over, we're again getting just a mirror pose of the pose on frame 0. So frame 0 and frame 10, just a mirrored image basically, but I don't want the chest to be rotated this far over on frame 10. So I'm going to just grab this keyframe and start dialing it back a bit, something maybe a bit like that, and then I can come in here and start tweaking the keyframes before it. Probably bring it down even lower. I'll go ahead and bring this one down and start creating a basic curve in here. And if you don't know this, something that can be helpful is when you grab a keyframe and you press G to do this move tool here, if you go ahead and press Y on your keyboard, that's going to just lock it in the up axis, so you don't accidentally change the frame that this keyframe is on. If I press G and just try to move this around, you can see I can pretty easily actually shift the timing of this keyframe, but really I just want to lock it in, up and down. So pressing Y will allow me to do that, and then X will allow you to shift it just in time, which can be helpful. So I think already something like that works pretty well. And also something that I want to do is come over here to view, and I just want to hide the, let's see, where is it? Show cursor in the graph editor. This cursor is this blue line in the graph editor. It's one thing that can be helpful for is if you're scaling, you can scale based off where this cursor is in the graph editor, but you can see it's this blue line and it looks like a curve itself, which really can be annoying when you always see it in your graph editor like this. So I usually actually like to just keep that off until I actually want to use this cursor for something. So it just makes it cleaner there. That looks like it might be decent there. I might want to tweak the rotate Y and get a pose a bit more like this on the opposite leg. So I'll go ahead and go to my curve, and right in here, I'll probably bring this up. I'm just going to test this out. I'm not sure if it's going to look good. Something I usually like to do when I'm animating is just play around with things, test different ideas quickly to see if I will like the way it looks. So I basically kind of just want to flip this curve, which probably would have been easier if I just grabbed the curve and actually flipped it than doing this one keyframe at a time. But I'll just see if this works. Kind of too late now. I might like that more. That might work, maybe. Let me actually undo that. And I think I might like this, but I want to go ahead and actually, now that I'm looking at it, I think I want to tweak the arms first before adjusting the chest anymore, because the arms are really distracting and they're not doing at all what I want them to do. So I'm going to shift select the shoulder, the upper arm and the forearm, and then the hand control. Get all of those selected. And let's see, I'm probably just going to delete all the keyframes between 0 and frame 10. And I'm going to go ahead and go to frame 0, press Control C to copy, go to frame 10, press Control V to paste. So I basically just copied that pose. So now you can see this arm is kind of hanging out behind her, which I think gives this run a bit more of a dynamic type of feeling to it. And then what I want to do is go to frame 10, and I do want to tweak this a bit. So I don't want it to be an exact, copied pose there. I want this arm to still move a little bit. So I'll kind of bring the shoulder in, bring the arm down a bit to maybe have it move about that much. And then I want to tweak how far it's coming to the side. And this might actually be moving too far this direction. I still might want to keep it behind her more, but I'll kind of see how that's looking. I think that's actually looking pretty decent. Let me go ahead and select the shoulder, the upper arm, the forearm, and the hand. I'm going to go ahead and press Control C on frame 0. Go to frame 20, paste it there. And actually, I don't know why. I don't know why I did that, because I already know it's the exact copied pose between here and here. What I actually need to do is delete these keyframes there. So you can see it goes to forward to frame 10 on that opposite foot coming forward, and then it goes back. So we get this still nice movement on the arm, but it's just kind of hanging out kind of behind her there. So we're getting something that feels a bit more like that. And I think I like the feeling of this. I might go ahead and maybe keep the shoulder back a little bit. Oops, maybe bring that arm, keep that arm back just a tiny bit more. Maybe something like that. And then let's see. Let me actually keep this rotated like that and see how this feels. Keep that hand kind of, that arm kind of rotated inward. So something like that. So I think that's working better. And then now let's take a look at this other arm. So this other arm is moving really far back behind her in the step. Again, because it was just a mirrored pose. So this, I think on frame 10, let's see. I'm actually first just try to tweak this pose a bit. Keep that arm rotated in a bit more. Again, I still want it to have movement to it, but I don't want it to just swing completely behind her. So I'll test this out. What I'm going to do is just delete all these extra keyframes in here. Let Blender just kind of blend between this to start, to see if I like this flow to it. Delete all these keyframes here. And just get kind of Blender blending between these main key poses for me. And that's looking decent. What I might actually do is I still have everything selected. Let me just select them all again just to make sure. What I'm going to do is go to frame 10, and I don't want this to move quite as far as it's moving. So what I can do is go to frame 10, press Shift E to open up this kind of tween or breakdown tool in Blender, and should be able to, actually it's not wanting to work at all. That's interesting. What happens if I just do, that's really weird. Never actually seen this happen before where it's just like popping. Huh. Again, probably user error. I'm not sure why it's doing this. Usually it'll let you, oh, maybe that's it. That's weird. So it's letting me blend between these keyframes, but not the keyframes between 0, 10, and 20. So I should be able to just blend this, but it doesn't want to work. So I'll just go ahead and grab the arm, keep it a bit more forward, probably keep this shoulder maybe a little bit more forward. One thing I do want to fix is I don't want to have it like swing out like that. I want to keep the arm kind of tucked in here. So something like this might work a bit better. Still getting that back and forth, but not nearly as much. And I might be able to increase that now just a little bit. Maybe something like that. Cool. I think that's working pretty decent. Now I want to go jump back to the chest. Go to my rotate Y. Now what I want to do on this is just press SY to scale and then type in -1 to just flip this curve, basically. And I think that's, let me undo that and see if I like that. One thing I do want to make sure I keep in mind is that this keyframe is on, let's see what value it's at, 2.44. So when I scale this, press SY, -1, I'm gonna bring this up and still make sure I still keep that same pose at the beginning. So I'll probably bring it up a bit more. Maybe bring it down a little bit. Doesn't need to be perfect to where it was, but I remember it was at around like 2.4. So something like that. And I think I like the way this is working now on the chest. Feels a bit more natural. Cool. All right. Let's see what I can do with the arm here to get movement that feels a bit better. Kind of just playing around with a few different keyframes. Don't really like how this is working yet. Don't want to do that. All right. And let's see, let's go to my rotate Y on this control. Maybe try a path a bit like this on the forward backward movement. I think I might have the arm moving too much. No, it's definitely moving too far in. Although that motion I think will work. I might dial back the amount that it moves back going into the down position. I might dial back the amount that it moves forward. And do something similar, but just go with something a bit more subtle as far as the back and forth movement. I think something like that will work. Now I want to take a look at some of the other axis, I think the Z axis, and see what this is doing, because it does feel a little bit strange. I'm going to select this control, make sure I make it cycle. All right. So I think it's coming too far in on frame 10. So I'm going to keep it out a bit. I think that might work. And we are getting a bit of kind of gimbling here, which is fine. You can see that Z and X do pretty much the same thing there as far as like what it's rotating. But I think this path might work. The only thing is I feel like it's going just a tiny bit too close to her hip on frame 14, so maybe I'll just force that out a little bit, something like that. Yeah, I think that works. Now I'll do a quick pass on the elbow, go in here and see if there's anything I can do to make this feel a bit better. I might try to extend it out, I think, as it comes forward. Maybe around frame 15, I'm going to pull it in just to get like a bit of overlap in there. I don't know if I like that. Let me actually see. Let me jump into my graph editor. Make sure I cycle this. Actually select all the curves. All right, and that's interesting. So again, I don't know what is going on. Let me select my curve, Shift E. All right, that's some weird bug. I had to clear it and then make it in order for it to actually show up. Interesting. Maybe grab the two keyframes here and maybe add a bit of bend to the elbow, the first and last pose. Then this whip back, I can dial that back. Something like this. I think might work. Starting not to like the amount of movement on this arm. Probably just want to dial this back a bit. So what I'm going to do is just press S and Y to scale this whole curve, this rotate Y curve on the arm in, so that I can just reduce the overall amount of movement that I'm getting on the arm. I think that might work a bit better. Yeah, I think that works. I'll do a quick pass. Again, kind of just layering this detail on the arm, kind of just moving down the arm chain and here. Let's see. On the Z-axis, I will bring that wrist up to get a bit of kind of like drag as it pulls forward. And then after frame 10, probably when the arm starts to swing back, maybe around frame 16, I'll bring that wrist in so we get a curve about like that, which looks pretty similar to the curve that we had on our elbow control as well. So we want to create something a little bit similar to that. And then on this, I'm going to press S and Y and scale all that in because I feel like it's a bit too much movement on the wrist. I'm going to keep it pretty subtle. I'm going to grab this elbow and I'm going to scale this movement in because looking at it, I just feel like it's just moving too much. Maybe dial this back, this keyframe back here. Bring that down. I think that works a bit better. All right. Now on this arm, I think it might still be moving too far back, so I'm going to tweak this. Maybe keep this elbow up. Something like that. Kind of have it traveling around this arc after that change, but I don't think I like that. Let me actually just try tweaking the elbow a bit through some of this. I think loosening up that elbow helps because I don't want it to feel like too kind of bouncy on that forearm. All right. So I think I kind of like this movement that I'm getting on the arm, but I think I just basically want to dial back that amount on some of this. Something like that. So create a bit of a kind of an arc through this. But that makes a little bit more sense with how she's actually running and what foot she's using to step, because the way I had it before, the arm was kind of doing the opposite back and forth that it's doing now. Whereas now it's going out as the knee is coming up. So it makes a bit more sense that she would, kind of make that room for that knee coming up. So she'd kind of swing her arm out and then back in on the opposite step and do that as kind of the loop. Take a look at some of the other curves and just make sure I'm getting curves that flow a bit better. So this, I can see it's not flowing the greatest between these two keyframes. It kind of goes up and then kind of hits a wall, goes down. So I'm going to just grab this keyframe and tweak it. Maybe just grab this tangent handle and create a flow that works a bit better. I think that's working. What I want to do now is take this shoulder and add a bit of kind of bounce on it along the X axis. So here I might try to go to frame 5. I'll just add a keyframe here and see what happens if I actually bring it up. So shoulder goes up. Here it might drop. Cycle that. Cool, I think that works. Let me grab this wrist and play around with adding a bit of rotation to it. Nice. All right. So I think the arms, the chest is working a bit better. Definitely a more interesting run than just having a straight kind of mirrored arm and chest pose. What I want to do now real quickly is just tweak the foot here. So as soon as she goes into the pose on frame 1, I want to zero out this foot roll control because I want to make sure her foot is completely planted on the ground through that. Same on this side. That should work. The feet were kind of easing into their planted position. Cool. And I feel like I might end up, I keep looking at this arm and wanting to come back to it just because I feel like the amount of movement that it's doing, I think maybe just the keyframe on frame 10, like I might tweak this and really kind of have it just hang out behind her. I think I do like that more, just simplifying it quite a bit more. I can grab this upper arm and on frame 10, I'll bring it down a little bit, but I just like the feeling of this arm kind of holding back as she's running versus having like a big kind of like swing through like this, like it was doing before, which I think can work, but it was just, I think it was giving a strange feeling with the left arm too, where it feels like now with it holding off, it's still moving forward a bit. So there's still some nice like overlap in the arm, some weight to it, but it feels more like this left arm is actually helping sort of like drive the run a bit more while this right arm is kind of hanging out behind her. So I think that works a bit better. All right, so looking at this now, I kind of want to go in and start refining a bit of the legs and the hips and just make sure they're working a bit better. For the most part, they're working decently, but you can see there's some big like pops and jitters in the knees that we want to fix. I might go in and maybe exaggerate some of the up and down on the body. We can loosen up the hips and the chest a bit more too. This is all kind of just refinement that we can do. Like already this is, you know, a pretty decent run cycle for the time we've spent on it. There's definitely a ton of polish and stuff we can do, but again, we could work on this forever and continue kind of tweaking things and refining things. But I think right now I want to kind of go in and focus on some of the major issues I'm seeing first, which are just the legs and the knees. So we'll go ahead and do that now. All right, so for the legs, I think what I first want to do is take a look at the hips and make sure these are working how I want. I don't really like what the hips are doing as far as the side to side. I've got too much movement, too much jittery movement. I think I just need to simplify this side to side movement. So I'll take a look at my curve and see what that's doing. And right away I can see it's not doing at all what it really should be doing. I'm not exactly sure what I was trying to do here. It looks like I definitely want to make sure I have this kind of nice bend this way as the weight is planted on that right foot. But like this extra movement here is just, I think I just need to simplify this. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete all these keyframes here. All right. And then I'll probably just delete these keyframes. And now I've just got this simple curve here that hopefully should work. So we've got this kind of back and forth. All right. Might try something like this. So I might just kind of reverse this curve here. Let me actually take, see. I'm gonna go to frame 5. I'm gonna drop a keyframe down and I want to bring this up about like this. So we get this nice kind of compression on the hip. Then here, go to frame 15. Should be able to bring this down. Let's try that. This direction. What I can do is grab keyframe on frame 5. I'm going to copy this translate Y value. Go to frame 15. Paste it. Put a negative value in there. So I can at least make sure that these are nice mirrors for that. So I think a curve like this should work a bit better. It definitely feels a lot more simplified, which I think works. And I can play around with this curve too and figure out, maybe get this to flow a bit better. So I might just add like a little bit of rotation to it. Same on this one, and just like a little bit of rotation so that curve kind of flows through there a bit better, and it doesn't have, you know, a completely flat tangent like that. So something like that might work. Cool. Yeah, I think that definitely works a little bit better. I'm going to take a look at the, should be rotate X. Yeah, this forward backward on the hip. I think I need to increase this. Obviously, I didn't really animate this. So what I want to do is, I think on this, to frame 4, let me grab this keyframe and probably bring it down. I believe I want the hips to kind of compress forward going into this sort of passing pose. So something like that. So we get like a nice weighty feeling to the hips as it lands. And then maybe on frame 10 I can, let's see. I definitely want it to do what it's doing here, how it's kind of, you know, going backward, because here she's pushing off with that leg. So we're going to get like a nice kind of extension on that. I might want it to start to come forward again on frame 10. So maybe have a curve like this. So we get that, you know, a nice extension on the hips, but then it comes back as she's, you know, bringing her foot forward. We might do something just like this, just to have a simple curve to it, but I'll go ahead and try this first. All right. I'm going to go ahead and copy the value on frame 2 for the rotate X. Go to frame 12, paste that. Frame 4. Keyframe on frame 4, copy that. Actually, did I copy this correctly? No. Interesting. Is my curve not updating? All right, let me grab this keyframe. Keyframe 14, paste it. That's weird. It's not wanting to paste that, so I'll just do this. See if I can paste, copy this value. Go ahead and grab this. I want to make sure it's cycling. I'll grab this value here, copy it, paste it. What in the world? Why is it? I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. I'm not exactly sure. Why it's not wanting to paste this. It seems like I've been getting some weird issues with Blender. All right, I'll just drag that down then. Blender's not wanting to actually work very well. Yeah, I think that works better. Those hips are working a bit better on that. Let me take a look at the Z direction on this. See if I can change anything. I'm gonna go ahead and cycle this. Actually, let me just go ahead and grab my hips. Select everything and just make sure it's all cycling. And I'm opening up this menu by pressing Shift E to open that up. I think for the most part, this curve should work. I'm just gonna smooth some things out. Fix some of these, hitches that are happening with the position of some of these keyframes. So just try to make it flow a bit better through here. Cool. All right. I think one thing I want to tweak are the legs swinging through. I might just push them in closer so they don't swing out quite as far. Same for this leg. As it swings through here, I might try to keep it a little bit closer. Kind of just bringing it in a bit more. Might rotate this foot out on this leg a tiny bit. All right. I think that works. I'm gonna actually take a look at the knees now and fix some of the path through here. I think on frame 12, I want to keep the knee out just a tiny bit more. Something like that. Actually, don't know if I like how much the knee points out on this pose. Oh, you know what? I just realized. I don't know how this happened because that's interesting. No wonder my values weren't changing. I don't have auto key turned on, so any changes that I'm making are not staying. So let's do this again. Let's bring this in a bit. Side in. So that's one definitely important thing that you want to make sure that you do is having auto key on is very helpful, especially if you're used to having auto key on. You're never going to press I to lock a keyframe down every time you make a pose change because you know it's going to be done automatically. Cool. Grab the knee now, bring it in. I don't like how far it's just like aimed out. The knee would probably want to stay kind of tucked in through a lot of this. That works a bit better on that leg, so I'm going to do the same thing on this leg. I think like this pose, I want to just bring that knee in on that contact. So I'm going to go ahead and copy from frame 0 to frame 20 and then move forward. Cool. It's looking decent. There's definitely lots of tweaks I could make on the legs. What I actually want to do is, let's see. I think I'm actually going to go ahead and track the path using the motion path. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see, calculate frame range. Cool. So this will allow me to see exactly what's going on through here. So I think immediately I kind of want to bring the leg up a bit higher through that to kind of, oops, what in the world? All right, here I want to dial back that rotation forward. So I'm going to still keep the leg kind of rotating back. And then through here, what I might actually do is start bringing the leg up a bit higher. Just so it doesn't feel like just a linear straight line into that contact position. That's working a bit better. Cool. Let me go ahead and delete that, do the same on this one. Update that. Here, I'm going to bring the foot up, keep it rotated back, jump forward, probably bring the foot up a little bit. And you can see at this point, like, I'm not worried about making this step, you know, mirroring it and making exactly like the right foot. At this point, I'm kind of just eyeballing things. It's okay to have, you know, your run cycle not, you know, 100% mirrored for the opposite leg at this point. It's also good to, you know, add a bit of variation too between the steps. I might dial back how far it comes out on this pose. So have it kind of come a bit straight down. Something like that. Cool. I'm gonna do the same on the opposite foot, so I'm gonna calculate this path real quick. And yeah, it's going too far out to the side, so I'm gonna bring that in. Something like that. All right. I think that's working. Something I do think I want to fix real quick is take a look at the spacing on the step here. So when she's stepping forward, you can see that the spacing between here to here is really small. So we get the feeling that the foot is actually slowing down as it gets closer to the ground, which is not really what we want. I was taking a similar approach to, you know, a bouncing ball exercise. Like as the ball falls back to the ground, it's going to speed up as it falls rather than slow down just before it hits the ground. So we're getting like this slowdown on the foot and like this really soft kind of plant, and then like a hard pose change from a straight pose into this really big bent pose on the leg. So what I'm going to do is just jump into my curve here. All right. So I think just on this, I'm just going to add a pose in here, add a keyframe, excuse me. Let's see. I don't know why Blender's doing this. All right. Let's bring this up. Something like that. Maybe bring this keyframe up as well. So we get a bigger gap in spacing on that drop. And then what I might do is I feel like this is a little bit too fast, so I might ease into this over one frame. So it's, you know, up and then plants over. So we get like one extra frame of the heel up, and I think that might work a bit better. And then we could add, you know, like a little bit of bend to this toe too. And then I'm going to do the same on this side. So coming forward through here, take a look at the Z location curve, drop a keyframe, and then kind of move it up. Just so we get a bigger jump in spacing there so it doesn't slow down as it gets closer to the ground. Same on this side. I'll probably keep the heel up a little bit and then plant, grab this toe control, like a little bit of bend in that toe. And then I can also do maybe like a little bit of toe bend coming through here as well. Loosen up the foot a bit on that, and then I'll do the same on this one. So a little bit of bend all the way through here. All right. Nice. Let's go ahead, and I think before I kind of end this run cycle here, there's definitely a lot more we could do. I mean, hair and stuff hasn't been touched yet. But before we kind of end it, I'm just going to quickly do kind of a neck head pass and just get a little bit of motion in the head. I don't want too much because I still want her to feel, you know, running with purpose. So she'll want to keep her head, you know, looking forward. So I don't want to have like a ton of just like overlap in the head and go really overboard with it and just, you know, start like adding a bunch of floppiness to it. So even like this much rotation forward might be too much, but I can take a look at that. I'm going to delete this keyframe here. So her head is rotating, her neck is rotating down all the way up to frame 6. And it's back up here. So maybe here I'll grab this, delete these keyframes, and I'll try a curve like this and see if it, I think it might work. It just loosens up the head just a little bit. And it might be too much. Let's go back to frame 0. What I actually want to do now is grab the head and add some rotation to this, and I kind of just want to counter a little bit what the neck is doing. So like here, the head might actually be rotating back just a little bit. And then forward. Might extend that rotation back. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I cycle this curve. It already is, so I don't need to worry about that. Grab this. Actually grab this rotate X value, paste it here. This one, copy that, paste it on frame 16. Copy 4. Actually think I want to, let's see. Let me bring this up. Something like that. I think that works a bit better. I'm going to copy this value, paste it here now. Have something like that. I think that kind of works. So we're getting a bit of bobbing in the head, but now what I actually want to do, now that I've animated the head, maybe I need to go back to the neck and try something where I basically might need to counter a bit. I think that might actually work better. I might just have to dial back the amount of movement I added to the neck. I think it feels better to have most of that bounce kind of just happening isolated to just her head, just to kind of loosen that motion up just a little bit. Something like that. And then real quickly, like typically how I would approach, animating hair like this, I'd probably just go kind of frame by frame and kind of just feel it out and figure out what kind of works well. Delete this keyframe. So real quickly, I'll just rough in the movement for the hair. It's probably not going to be perfect. So go here, start rotating this down. So get something a bit like that. Definitely not the best, but it adds like a little bit of looseness to this. I want to make sure I cycle this. Let me see. I thought I had selected both controls to do this, but I guess I just selected the base. That's strange. Does this even do anything? All right. Could be why. What I might do is go ahead and select this base control. I'm going to press Control C on all those curves. Come in here and paste. So now you can see both of those are moving. I'm getting a bit more bounce to this. And then what I might do is grab just the keyframe, the curves for this end kind of tuft of hair, and grab all my keyframes and then shift it over one frame to see if I can get like a little bit of offset between both of these. So again, it just adds like a bit of looseness to it. And then I probably would want to go in here and add like a little bit of side to side to this as well. I'll kind of just leave it there for now. Can't select both sides. It's not working properly. Oh well. And then just same for like the hair on the side as well. Just doing something similar, just like frame by framing, kind of working through this, figuring out, you know, what would work well as far as like the back and forth on the hair here. Same for the front. We could probably add, I think there's just one control here. Probably similar to the back, like have this kind of up, oops, down. I delete this keyframe, just to kind of simplify that movement. Up, bring it down, delete that, so we get something kind of like that. But yeah, I think that's actually gonna probably wrap it up for this tutorial. There's definitely more we can do, but this is usually how I approach tackling a run cycle. I try to start simple, try to start with, you know, letting Blender give me, you know, simple blends between, you know, a mirrored pose. So we started out just straight up mirroring the pose on frame 0 to frame 10. So we got a, you know, perfect flip of that. Built a lot of the run based off that, and then went in and tried to refine it a bit further and add a little bit more unique detail by kind of tweaking the whole upper body, having the arm kind of stay behind her as she runs, keep that other arm forward. But that is how I like to approach runs like this. Is I like to start with almost kind of like a sort of a vanilla basic cycle, just a simple sort of mirrored cycle, and rough that in, get the legs working, get the basic up and down of the body working, and then go in and further sort of refine things and, you know, add tweaks and changes to it. But yeah, it's going to wrap it up for this tutorial. Hopefully you guys were able to learn a few things. If you have any questions or comments, please be sure to leave them below. And if you have any suggestions for any future Blender tutorials, drop those in the comments as well. So thanks for watching.